But this talk is intended to be pretty interactive. I encourage interaction. I encourage chat. I will try to look at chat. I encourage unmuting the microphone. Whatever just happened to me, that was loud. Does the Discord lock if I get kicked? Yeah, there's a dead man switch. If I die, it's all coming down with me. So good luck, everybody. May the odds ever be in your favor. So let's talk about some things. Primarily, let's talk about today is a very special day for our OG American ally in the French. Today is the National Day of France, or I think they call it like Fête Nationale Français. Anyone speak French? I'm grasping at straws there. But it's actually apparently colloquially called Bastille Day in English-speaking countries, but that doesn't actually translate to what they call it. So typical sort of American thing, like we're going to nationalize your own holiday and give it our own title that you don't even use. But a fun day, a really fun event happened in 1789 on this day. And we're going to contextualize access control in the context of the storming of the Bastille. And I feel like that's a great way to start. So I'll start because there are a lot of people, thankfully, that I don't recognize here. Super fun to see. I'll give you a quick background on me. I apologize for this overly branded talk. It's the one sort of slide deck that I have that looks semi-decent. I would otherwise not try to shove my brand down your throat too much. But my name is Andy Sauer. I'm a partner and the CISO at a company called Sentinel Blue. We're a C3PAO, Microsoft AOSG, MSSP, MSP. We do a lot of stuff to support defense contractors. My background's very technical. I started out on the help desk. I worked my way up through systems engineering into IT management, cybersecurity management. Been doing it for about 13 years, the last 6 of which have been primarily focused in security. I am the admin and lead mod of the NIST Control subreddit and a couple other subreddits. And then this here, CUI COE Discord. I am the originator and was the person who clicked the create button and made the initial invites to, the 8 to 10 people who kicked this thing off. And super pumped to see where we're at. I love seeing new people come in, and we're well past the 2,000 membership mark at this point, so it's super cool. I famously was told back in the day on IRC in the sysadmin channel that I've had no business being in IT. That was really, really helpful. Great community that was. I was asking some pretty basic questions about networking, and I was told something like I probably shouldn't even program a thermostat, let alone a Cisco ASA. So thanks for that, guys. I do not own SentinelOne. I have been asked about this. If I owned SentinelOne, my life would be very different. So I do not own SentinelOne. And yes, I do agree that there are too many Sentinels now. In my defense, Sentinel Blue is a name that we conjured up in 2019. And Microsoft Sentinel was not a thing yet. SentinelOne was a thing, but a little bit smaller. And I'm sorry to contribute to the confusion. Today is my birthday. I'm celebrating my 34th birthday. And I can imagine a better way to spend it than hanging out with you guys. I am a CCP. That is one of my credentials. And Sentinel Blue is a C3PAO. So I've got some pretty strong opinions. I think everyone that knows me knows that. And I'm not going to back off those too much today. I'll let you know how I feel. Right on. First and foremost, I can't not take the opportunity when we have a lot of new faces, a lot of new people that may be new to the Discord, to get on my soapbox briefly and tell you a little bit about this Discord. This Discord is not sponsored. You may have noticed that if you've been around. There is no vendor sponsorship. There's no monetization. There's no mechanism for that, frankly, bullshit. And we have a very low tolerance threshold for what would otherwise be sponsored, like behavior or salesy behavior. Excuse me. The original intent behind this Discord was because myself and some others who were chatting on Reddit about things like GCC High needed people to talk to and compare notes. And that was the spirit that this was established in, was we needed a free place to talk and share conversation about what the hell is going on in the world of the dead. And that is through and through the spirit of this Discord. It will remain that way as long as I'm involved, and as long as ultimately I have the kill switch to it. I'm going to hold it hostage to the idea that this is a place for free and open sharing of information. And that's been been what has driven the growth and success, and why this is today. I challenge anyone to challenge this notion that this is the best place on the internet, the best community for these conversations. And I think we demonstrate that all the time. And then when we do events like this as well. Like I said, we have a very low tolerance for sales pipelining. This is not a place where vendors are allowed to monitor the chat and then send you a direct message when you ask a question and say like, hey, I saw you asked a question about this. Did you know that I sell that? I encourage everyone, if you receive DMs like that, you screenshot that, you send it to a mod, that will be resolved very quickly. We have a very, very limited threshold for that stuff. You may notice that there are some people with different color codes to their usernames, and if you look over on the right sidebar, you'll see some titles. We have established and fellows titles. Established are folks that have been around for a while, that have made known to everyone else, like they know what they're talking about. They produce good content. They're good engagers of the community. And then there's the fellows. The fellows have a sort of a mandate to drive the community. It's sort of a board of directors of the community. It's folks that we established a trust with over the last 4 years of hanging out together. It's folks that know what they're talking about, are experts in the field, but really that understand the spirit behind the community and sort of serve as an informal police force to ensure that the community stays as fantastic as it is. Now, we are all entirely self-elected, so don't consider us authoritative. You are absolutely welcome and encouraged to have your own opinions. Don't think that a fellow or an established person somehow wins out on everything by nature of that. Just understand that they're sort of paragons of the community. And finally, a big thing, no tolerance for people being assholes, unfriendly, non-inclusive. This is a friendly, inclusive environment. It's free, it's open sharing, all that sort of stuff. We want everyone to hang out here and spend time with us and teach each other how to deal with this mess that we all find ourselves in. Continuing more into my talk, some disclaimers. I'm not here to sell you anything. I have tools that I use, products that my company chose after a lot of trial and error and checking things out. I'm not here to sell it to you. I'm just here to tell you what we do. I'll also tell you I have some pretty liberal interpretations in compliance matters. I'm pretty well known, I think, to be on the fringe of pushing the envelope of what's accepted. I've been through 2 DIBCACs. I've fought several battles in those DIBCACs on my more liberal interpretations, and as long as they've been grounded in reason and defensible, we've had success there. So I'm not reckless in that, just a little more aggressive. We're constantly iterating. Cybersecurity is a process. It's a life cycle. It's not an end state. It can't be achieved. It can just be done. It can be something that you practice, and we don't think we'll ever be done. Again, I'm just a guy from some company. Your mileage may vary on these different things. There's so much nuance. There's no one size fits all to anything. And of course, in the spirit of the day, as a disclaimer, and it really is a warning, if you're going to become the emperor of the French, you really should not invade Russia. It hasn't worked out for anybody. I've been on a string of public speaking gigs, and for whatever reason, it's the thing now. Everyone loves to talk about how ChatGPT wrote their slides for them. Just here to tell you, this has the human touch to it, which we may not have for very long. We may all be replaced by bots in the end. But at least for this talk, it was done by a human. Before we can talk about anything, I'm going to set up Glenda for her talk after me and just bring up the NIST cybersecurity framework. Is it perfect? Absolutely it is. I don't know why they're trying to come out with a new version. They crushed it the first time. It's perfect. It is a great framework for visualizing and managing cybersecurity as a life cycle. I use it frequently when I work with executives and business leaders who are not cybersecurity thinkers. They don't need to be. This is just a really solid way of visualizing what it is that cybersecurity teams are trying to do. The thing I'm going to point out is that it all starts in the identify category. Bad identification work leads to bad everything else. And that's going to be some context to our talk. I know we're trying to let's get to the content, to the meat of this thing, but we do have some other things that I just want to bring up, some assumptions that we have. Because I don't want to give the welcome to cybersecurity talk that you've probably heard 100 times. We're going to talk a little bit more advanced stuff. So here are some assumptions. You have to have stopped opening RDP up to the internet. If you're still doing that, you probably have a lot more to do before you're ready for any of the concepts I'm going to talk about and any of the technologies I'm going to talk about today. If you have RDP open to the internet, you need to stop doing that immediately. You should probably get off this call right now and go deal with that. Ideally, you have also air-gapped your backups and you follow the 3-2-1. This is not totally related to access control, but if I'm going to plug in some assumptions of how mature you should be before you're ready to jump into some of the topics we're going to discuss, I need you to understand that your backups need to be air-gapped. You should already be using MFA broadly. It should be just about everywhere, certainly anything that's externally facing. I shouldn't have to sell you on the idea of MFA. And then you probably should have some form of endpoint protection. We're going to assume all of that is the case as I go through examples and we talk about scenarios and case studies of what we do. Okay, so everyone heard that, not just me. All right, I was like, why did I just hear that? And I saw Katie Arrington's face. It's pretty funny. Well done, whoever did that, but let's not do any more of that. We are on LinkedIn. That's more of a professional community than this is. So, all right. Any good talk starts with a problem statement. In our scenario, we're going to start with a problem picture. It speaks 1,000 words, right? Look where you're at. You're essentially in the Bastille. And there's some bad stuff happening outside. Some real bad stuff, some angry people. This lady up front looks like, she means violence. We got to do something about this. Here's what happens, or here's what happened in this scenario. It's 1789. Things in France are not going very well. Anyone who's studied history, if you know what's going on in 1789, right before the French Revolution truly kicks off, things are bad and Parisians are upset, and there's protests and there's some violence starting up. There's a castle called the Bastille being used as a prison, but also being used as a stockpile of weapons and gunpowder. And about a day before, on like July 12th or 13th or something like that, they actually evacuated even more gunpowder and weapons to the Bastille, but they didn't really do much to increase the security of it. Staffed by a skeleton crew, largely of non-combat ready soldiers, what they called invalids, who are basically injured, unable to serve in combat roles. So you have some folks who aren't ready for a fight, staffing this castle stockpiled full of weapons, and they're vastly outnumbered by a legion of unsophisticated attackers, like we showed in the last picture, who eventually were reinforced with some pretty heavy weaponry. The castle was at a certain point breached, and all-out confusion and pandemonium broke. Pretty bloody fight. I think it's about 100 people were killed in it, and a lot of chaos between the troops there. There was a time where the troops were yelling for the crowd to leave, and the crowd thought the troops were yelling to come, and that sort of made things worse, and then the troops couldn't communicate, and people started firing when they didn't intend to. So a whole mess, right? The governor of the Bastille eventually recognized, like, this is a non-tenable situation. It's bad. Let me cut my losses, see what I can do. He surrenders the garrison, and that is largely considered the flashpoint of the French Revolution. The governor of the Bastille famously says, "Enough, let me die," and he's promptly obliged of that, and the crowd, after marching him through Paris, ends up killing him. Bloody affair, pretty gnarly, and if you go back and you think, that's where you are right now, this is not good. Now, I wonder if you figure out who you are in this metaphor yet. If not, we're gonna contextualize it. Your CUI system. It's 2023, and things in DIB cyberspace are not going well, are they? Does anyone feel like things are going well? I don't have that vibe myself. Controlled and classified information stockpiled in insecure contractor IT systems. Juicy targets for adversaries. Skeleton crews of mostly inexperienced IT security professionals, vastly outnumbered by a legion of, again, unsophisticated attackers and the occasional nation-state actor. Systems get breached, there's confusion, there's no preparation, it's chaos, and there's significant loss. Organizations recognize this, they get compromised, they cut their losses, they surrender, they send Bitcoin to the attackers, or they do things that are worse. And thus, instead of a revolution, we get a Chinese F-35 clone. And we all get the same feeling as the governor did. Just let me die. After submitting a DibNet incident report and getting ready to deal with that fallout. If you haven't seen this is the Chinese F-35. Basically looks just like an F-35. So a reminder, this is where you are. You're in that castle. You have the stockpiled things that the unsophisticated mobs want. Those unsophisticated mobs are occasionally backed up by some pretty powerful stuff that want to get in there and get what you have. You probably don't have the resources much to defend it. Not to insult anyone, I'm not saying anyone here is one of those inexperienced security professionals. We're talking industry-wide here, right? There's a lack of that talent, there's a lack of that capability, there's certainly a lack of the resourcing, and that's a bad place to be. And here's the outcome. The stakes are pretty high. This is an actual drawing of the events, and if you haven't solved the whole metaphor yet, you're kind of the governor in all of this. And that's you if all of this goes bad. Now, that's for dramatic effect only. This is not life and death normally, right? Some of our work does truly impact the warfighter, and for that there is definitely some life and death to it. But for the most part, it's not that serious, but it is pretty high stakes. You don't want to be the guy on the right. Now I know we're all over the place, but I'm a big fan of The Office, and there's a great scene in The Office that sort of encapsulates what the real problem is here. Like what we all know is the real problem. It's that Bob in Human Resources want to be helpful. When the son of the deposed king of Nigeria emails you directly asking you for help, you help. His father ran the freaking country, man. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to actually get a little more serious here pretty soon in this, is really about attack surface. Access control is primarily a way of controlling attack surface, and what I want to talk about today is largely around attack surface reduction as a means of access control, and then we're also going to get into more access control capabilities and technologies, zero trust, and that kind of thing. But I think it's a prudent definition to talk about up front, especially if you guys aren't as familiar with the term. Attack surface is the total sum of all the points of vulnerabilities and entryways into a system or network that can be targeted and exploited by malicious actors. If your IT system is a building, this is every door. We're going to get into solutions and technologies and stuff. I'll just show you some of my biases so you know where I'm coming from. Sentinel Blue is a fully cloud company. Our clients tend to be very cloud focused. We don't ourselves deal in classical on-prem. We actively push our clients to Starbucksify, which is to say eliminate any trusted infrastructure and just treat their office like a place where people come to get coffee, get on the Wi-Fi, and maybe meet with someone else. We're fully bought into the advantages of operationalizing IT expenses through things like cloud services, SaaS services, versus capitalizing through large infrastructure. I know there's a debate about it. I'm pretty squarely on the side of operationalizing expenses, but I understand there is a debate. And then our approach and the choices that we make reflect this. So our biases will show through in what I talk about and how I approach these problems today. All to say, like, look, this is my opinion on this stuff. It's worked for me, may not work for you. Take it with a grain of salt. You don't have to trust me. I'm not someone with some authority. I'm just someone who's been doing it. I've had some success through some dibcacks, and, we're going to talk about how. Let's talk solutions, right? So we understand the problem. We have a Bastille. We got stuff that other people want. We need to defend it. And we're going to talk through some some common approaches, some ways that we can do this, and it is somewhat chronological in means of importance. So, chapter 1 of our story, but we are moving on to Lord of the Rings memes now. We're going to be all over the place on memes, so make sure you're holding on. It's going to be rapid. But the internet is scary. It's a scary place. If anyone is in the MSP community, you might recognize some of those logos. I did use this originally at an MSP conference. But yeah, the internet's a scary place. You don't want to be on it unless you need to be. So what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about the approach to attack surface reduction that is making it not accessible. Getting rid of those doors and getting rid of as many of those as you can. You can't get hacked if your things are not accessible. Now, this is mostly true. Some purist in the chat is going to talk about how, like, well, if I get my hands on the physical hardware and chipset and blah, 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 intercept the BitLocker key, yeah, we get it. For the most part, let's deal in reality. So if something's not on the internet, the risk to it has been minimized so greatly that in the context of all the other shit we have to get done to secure the DIB, this is a phenomenal approach to reducing attack surface. So my number one directive, if you do nothing else, is review the things you have on the internet. Even if they're behind HTTPS, even if you have good encryption on it, even if it's behind single sign-on, get it off the internet, and your risk is massively reduced. Just a couple of days ago, Microsoft, whose global email system is on the internet, but who also spends billions of dollars securing it, has HTTPS and is one of the biggest SSO providers in the world and has all that, got breached. Could not have happened if it was not on the internet. Now, the nature of that solution is, of course, it needs to be on the internet. It's part of the risk we deal in. Point being, though, no matter what you do, we're using technology to secure an internet-facing asset, and technology has vulnerabilities, and people learn to capitalize on them. So get your shit off the internet if it doesn't need to be. Attackers are looking for quick wins from easy targets. You're not special. You're not generally being specifically targeted. In the DIB, you're maybe being targeted as a member of the DIB, but remember, the DIB's like a million companies, and most of us don't work at companies where we're being specifically targeted, Attackers are sending out bulk attacks with some pretty dumb techniques. Dumb in that they're not sophisticated, in that they're just scanning networks and scanning IPs, looking for known vulnerabilities and exploiting them. They don't want to work for it. That's not the game for them. This is about volume for them. It's a numbers game. They want quick, easy wins. If you take your shit off the internet, that's a lot of work to find some way to eventually get to it. Now, can things like Stuxnet happen? Absolutely. But do you know how many millions of dollars were spent on Stuxnet? Probably billions. That was a lot of work to achieve that. It was very difficult. We can make that happen by taking things off the internet. The way we can do this is we can use tools like SASE tools to provide access to your team. Two tools that you would otherwise have on the internet and that you want that are like web accessible. When you have a dispersed workforce and you can't put everything just on a local network, a SASE tool is a phenomenal tool. And there's a bunch of these out there now. I'll talk a little bit about some and the one that we use. But this can still provide the same experience for someone in your company to access something that would otherwise be on the internet over a secure network that is not internet facing. I do say avoid old school VPNs. SASE tools and zero trust network access, private access type tools have a lot in common with VPNs, but there are some structural and architectural differences that are meaningful. SASE tools are generally a slew of different products, from secure web gateways, private access, CTNAs, etc. Way more mature, have way more capability than your old school VPN. And then, of course, your old school VPN tends to have to go through a firewall through a local network, which not optimal. And then, another way to reduce attack surface is, okay, let's say you can't take something off the internet, it's client facing, something of that nature. There's some other stuff you can do to reduce visibility. Now, security through obscurity is not security. I know that. We all know that. But the more we make it difficult, the better things are. So you can always use a secondary domain name for infrastructure. If you're acme.com maybe buy acme.net and put whatever internet-facing stuff you need on that. That way, you're a little harder to OSINT into a victory for someone. Implementations for this. Well, the first and foremost that comes to my mind, and I'm going to draw a lot on our experience, is tools that you can self-host. Like if you have a password manager tool that you run a server, you run a Linux server running, what's a popular one a bunch of people are using? I can't think of it off the top of my head. But so you host a password manager on your own server. No need for that to be on the internet. Bitwarden. Thanks, John. Bitwarden could be on a SASE network where you can interact with it no matter where you're at, provided you have a means to get on your SASE network. And the SASE network, any of these capable SASE tools will do a lot of checks before it lets you on that network to even, initially access that. So that's a big win. You get multi-layered protection, very little exposure, and your user experience is what you ultimately wanted. You wanted someone to be able to access this tool from wherever they're at, whenever they're working, and not have much of a painful time getting in. If you can't take something off the internet, you can at least take the host operating system off the internet by using reverse proxy technology. If you have a server, a Windows server that's running an IIS site, and it's also running the local database on the server there and whatnot, don't put that out there on the internet, even if you're only open 443 up to it. A reverse proxy is a very simple technology and very sort of, I won't say dumb, but a very easy thing. You put in front of a server and you just pass web traffic through an intermediary, and you reduce the vulnerabilities of the host OS being able to be exploited, which is a big win. You can also look at something like a web application firewall. It's a way more advanced capability in front of the server, but does have a reverse proxy-like capability. Tools internal to your organization are the great candidates to be taken offline, especially through, again, something like a SASE network. Going back to the cybersecurity framework, all this is all well and good, and you might know off the top of your head some of these things, but you need to do a really good identification step. You need to scan all of your known IPs, look at your internet bills, find out what the IPs are that your company's paying for. The IT manager 3 managers ago might have paid for 20 IP addresses when you guys really only use one, and you might find there's some little box sitting in the server rack sitting on one of those IPs. So capture that stuff, scan it all, go in your Azure tenant, your AWS, find everything you have that could be internet facing, identify it, and then have this talk. Can we get this thing off the internet? The rule here is a system should only be internet accessible by exception, and by a significant exception. The default should be that no external access is allowed to any IT system. That should be very straightforward thought, and this is basic access control, basic attack surface reduction we're talking. As a case study, at Sentinel Blue, my company, we used a tool for password management and documentation. When we originally rolled it out, we self-hosted. We opted to self-host it in Azure Government because we do store data related to our clients who are DIB clients. We don't store CUI in it, but still. During a risk assessment process, we agreed, okay, this thing, yeah, we like the development team and all that, but it's got some pretty juicy secrets in it, and if it did get compromised, it would be a really bad day for us and a worse day for our clients. So the risk of a potential 0 day, we resolved it's too great for us to deal with the convenience of having it accessible from anywhere, in quotes. So we went with a SASE tool called Cloudflare Zero Trust. And what we do is we establish a tunnel on this Zero Trust network where our password server communicates outwardly to the Cloudflare server. So it's not like a VPN where we VPN and we get on the local network with that server. It's more advanced than that. It's that we tunnel traffic from our password management server to the Cloudflare network. It goes through an application firewall, and only the stuff that is necessary gets passed through. There's no capability to SSH it because we're sitting on the same LAN or anything like that. That makes it so that we can make it feel internet accessible, and it has a memorable URL that our folks just know they can bookmark or they can go to. And as long as they're connected to our SASE network, they can get to that server. Feels very, very native, functionally the same, and really doesn't add a lot of time to the process. There's like another authentication piece that occasionally comes up, but once it's set up properly, it's very, very straightforward and easy. We give other core applications access to the Cloudflare network so that, some of our services communicate via API with each other. And that's another reason we might say, we probably need to put this on the internet because we have these public APIs between our different services that we want to communicate and send data to each other. The SASE tools like Cloudflare Zero Trust allow even API traffic to be authenticated and pass through that network and off the open internet. So there's very few reasons why we have found there's any need for something to be available on the internet. So we just do tunnel-to-tunnel connections and we're allowed to send API traffic. When we can't utilize that full tunneling capability or even Cloudflare Zero Trust, we've done some stuff with automation where we extract IP addresses from like our EDR tool, and that's a list of tools or a list of IPs where our EDR tool is running. So it's a list of computers that are under management, essentially. And then we put a firewall in front of an application, and we've even said, like, okay, drop all traffic that doesn't come from these IP addresses. That's less optimal than these other options, but it's still a way that we've used to access maybe more legacy architecture that can't support something like an Argo tunnel. This at least allows us to limit it somewhat. So that's chapter 1. If you can get that shit off the internet, get it off. Get it off the internet. Now 2, my next access control attack surface reduction means one identity to rule them all. In my Great Bernie meme, I am tired of asking vendors to stop putting SSO on their enterprise plan. There's a link to a great GitHub page, sso.tax, where it names and shames companies who put the very basic security requirement of single sign-on in 2023 behind higher paid tiers, and I fucking hate it. I'm sorry to use that word, but I feel very strongly about this. I've had talks with companies who say, oh man, we take your data so seriously. We're so concerned about your security. And I've sent DMs on LinkedIn to CISOs of those orgs to say, how dare you claim that? And then not even have basic capability of a single sign-on as a means to reduce the attack surface that you pose by letting us put your data in your tool. I can't take seriously anyone who's an information security person who would justify this stuff in 2023. So, that said, let's talk about it. I feel strongly, Allison, you know this. A single identity is a key tool in attack surface reduction. If you can't remove infrastructure from the internet, at least route access through a modern identity provider, like an Azure AD, Okta, Duo, whatever you have. This allows us to provide much higher fidelity controls like multi-factor, conditional access based on IP, based on app types, checking device compliance. These things do a lot better than the simple user password combination and maybe like a text-based message that you get sent talking about you QuickBooks Online, get with the program. These are excellent in terms of at least, hey, if we're going to have attack surface on the internet, let's make the identity part of it very difficult to breach. One identity is a great concept. It's one identity to watch. It's one identity to disable. Fewer cracks for things to fall through. I think back to like my first IT role and all the systems I had access to, all the usernames and passwords that I had, the fact that I used the same terrible password on all of them, and that none of them talked to each other. None of them, maybe a few might have been fed into a SOC or something like that. Not great. So one identity is a high fidelity way to monitor and high confidence way to control access and deal with things like disabling someone after they've left. Get away from shared accounts as much as you can. There are definitely still scenarios where that's required. Not all applications and vendors are up to speed on this stuff. So you do still sometimes have architecture where this has to happen. This is a big problem in my field of managed services and how difficult this stuff is. But have that stuff go away if you can, and then get away from having to have lots of usernames and passwords per person as much as you can. Get down to single identities, and then I'm just going to jab this one in there. Please stop requiring arbitrary password resets. It does nothing but convince people that the best password is when they just push their finger on Q and they move their finger to the right to R. And they do the same thing. They hold Shift and they do that. True story. There's a top secret facility that services submarine stuff where Apparently, that's a well-known thing where all the developers in that facility all share the same password because it meets the requirement. And then when they have to change it, they just reverse it. So that, oh, yep, you change your password. This is dumb stuff. We need to get past this stuff. So single identity, lots of advantage. This is more attack surface reduction. You're going to see a theme here, guys. It's way more convenient to users, which means users are less likely to circumvent what you're trying to do. This is a concept I wish more security professionals would get on board with. Users can be not the enemy and actually can be helpful. It gives your SOC fewer authentication points to monitor, which means better logging, higher fidelity. On my team, I have a single identity for a ton of the work I do, and I do a lot of stuff. I'm bouncing all over the place. That gives them a very easy profile to build of what the F is Andy doing, or they can start to see what's anomalous. Users then also detect broken stuff quicker when when it's all tied to a single identity. They notice right away when they're getting blocked because there's a high risk associated with their account. Good luck with your admin account, which you might access once a week, depending on your role. That can be compromised and you won't notice for a long time. So I'm sold on the advantages here. There's some great tools for this. Going back to my biases, Azure Active Directory, I would say, is best in class. Certainly servicing the DIB, it is pretty standalone in that we have Azure Government and Azure AD. You most likely have it if you're already in Office 365. You just need to pay for the premium version. Premium Plan 2 is the move, and I'll talk a little bit about why, but primarily because it has privileged identity management, PIM, which is huge. But there's all these other stuff, Okta, OneLogin, Auth, Duo. And then we have this emerging concept of passwordless, which I think is going to be a wrench thrown into NIST's plans with 801.71, potentially, depending on how Revision 3 deals with it, but certainly a better concept overall, in my opinion. So let's go back to the case study. If you guys haven't caught on to sort of how I'm approaching this, let me tell you sort of my thoughts on it. Let me tell you how we have done it, because I don't want to sell you something I haven't done and lived myself. We have over 20 applications that our team uses throughout the week. There's 10, 12 of us, something like that now. If we all had different accounts for each of those applications, that's like over 200 accounts to deal in. That's non-tenable. So what we have decided as company policy is we only purchase tools that have access to SAML SSO. I will unfortunately tell you, there are some tools that are so good that we even pay for the enterprise just so we can get access to SSO. And I'm sorry, I can't be a purist in all ways, but as much as I can, I do vote with my dollars there. Now, we absolutely will not purchase or use something that won't let us SAML to Azure AD. That is an absolute no-go for us. We have implemented a robust set of Azure AD conditional access rules to require things like strong MFA, require access from compliant devices. And by the way, strong MFA, what I mean there is strong authenticators like the Microsoft Authenticator app, not phone calls and text messages, right? Require access from compliant devices with our Intune compliance, to block non-US IP addresses. In a lot of cases, we only allow specific specific IPs to access specific applications. We can require specific device types and specific applications. We talked about this a little bit earlier with Amir and Caleb. We some time spent on Intune mobile app management. This gives us multiple layers that we can apply to our authentication sequence, which will disrupt compromised credentials, man-in-the-middle type attacks, phishing, and phished MFA credentials, things of that nature. So for things that have to be on the internet by the nature of what they are, like all the SaaS tools we consume, at least we have a single control point through which we can feed all this stuff. And hey, I use that term for a reason, like a managed access control point, because hey, this is a way that 171 can be assisted. There's the control related to, routing remote access through but managed control points. We've used this argument successfully. Our SOC team now has a single thread to pull on for user access behavior. So they see what I'm doing. They don't have to monitor my many different accounts. They just see my account and what I'm up to. And they have a profile of what's normal for me. And Microsoft also uses their backend algorithms to get that profile and figure out what would be risky for me, regardless of the context that I'm in. Then we also extend conditional access rules into client tenants. Again, we're a managed services provider. We use our single identities to even access and do work in client tenants through Azure AD Federation and guest access. And we can actually use our same single sign-on, single identity, apply the same rules, and make it so that our administrator rights require us to be on things like an Intune compliant device on a single allowed IP and things of that nature. There's a huge risk buy down for us as an MSP, and for our MSP clients, a great way to help them sleep comfortably at night knowing that we haven't exposed them unnecessarily if we can. But some of you are thinking right now, but Andy, if there's one identity for access to everything, then hackers only need to breach that one account to get everything. That is you, right before Chapter 3, which is lovingly titled Trust But Verify. I'll give everyone a second to consume my fantastic Vince McMahon meme here, which is escalating through authentication strengths here, and the authentication process and the verification process. C-class, this is S tier, bro. This is S tier for sure. Ultimately, the best being that we restrict access to zero trust network. We require all those things above: username, password, MFA match, using a number MFA that's non-phishable, devices encrypted, it's got firewall enabled, running all of our software that we want it to. So let's talk about the multiple verification steps, the layers of verification. A username and password plus MFA is not good enough anymore. Attackers are smart. They have figured out things like SIM jacking, where they can, get your phone number, convince Verizon to switch it to their SIM, and then they can intercept your SMS message, and boom, they're in. Even things like 6-digit codes are pretty easy to phish. A lot of people, through social engineering, will just give that right up. And then even things like push notifications have become a problem, where people will get push notifications throughout the day while they're getting brute forced, and they're tired of clicking deny, and they're finally just like, you know what? It's probably some app somewhere that's logged in that I can't see. I'm just going to hit accept, and okay, yep. You just let someone bypass it. So this is not a good enough combination anymore. We should be validating that users should be there, and that their devices should be there, and that there's acceptable device posture. And we should evaluate this stuff every time. Obviously, we go back to some assumptions here, like not every tool can deal with all this. I get all that. But where possible, all these validation steps should occur every time. SASE tools, again, going back to Cloudflare, identity providers like Azure AD, can combine to give you an incredibly robust stack for access control. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in our case study. And if you saw the announcement this week, Microsoft's entering the fray of SASE tools through their Microsoft Entra Internet and Private Access. That's in preview and commercial. When's it coming to GCC High, you ask? Who knows? Maybe next year. Maybe never. How bad do you want it? Even if you get my username and password and you beat my MFA, can you then spoof my device and all of its postures? Can you present from my allowed IP range? Can you connect to my zero trust network provider and pass the device posture checks that check our our ERP, our vulnerability scanner, checks that it's Intune compliant with our named tenant? Got to be pretty sophisticated to beat all that. A skilled attacker can, of course, beat all of these elements, but remember, they want easy targets. This whole thing's about reducing your attack surface and making yourself a much harder target. So the advantages to this layered approach, again, more attack surface reduction. I think we're all getting the point. We get these intensive device posture checks. We can validate that services and software is running. This is also great from a compliance standpoint, because now I can showcase to an assessor, hey man, we don't let people even access the CUI environment unless they're running the things that are named in our baseline. It's not just policy statement. It's technical validation in real time. We can even, using our SASE tool, and I think this is probably useful by lots of other SASE tools, we can make sure specific files are present and validate that their hash matches what we want it to be. That way we can check. It's essentially a file integrity management capability for things like security software. And we can check for critical configurations. Are things encrypted? Do they have firewall enabled and things of that nature? And then we can validate, are people using approved mechanisms to log into things? One that we have is, if you want to elevate to a global administrator, that's all well and good. And there are reasons to elevate. But we're not going to let you do it using multi-factor that is not strong. It has to be a number match through a phone, or it has to be using a FIDO2 token. Tools for this, again, going back to my bias and what we use, Cloudflare Zero Trust. We looked at all the ones listed below. Cloudflare Zero Trust is very low barrier to entry. We've had a lot of success with it. We've been using it over a year now, and we evangelize it when we can. They're a fringe player. They're all in the up and coming, but they do have a FedRAMP offering. And they're much more low barrier to entry than others that want like enterprise contracts for you to get their FedRAMP offering. Also, Azure Active Directory conditional access is instrumental to all of this. In our case study, this is just a scenario that I'll pose and just sort of show you how we pull all this together. We have a remote control tool. We have help desk technicians who can use a remote control tool to jump on an end user's computer to assist them when they have a problem. Before that a person can access our remote control tool, they must start out on our Cloudflare Zero Trust network. So what they do in their browser, they type in the URL to our remote control tool, and there's a firewall in front of that tool that checks, first of all, okay, is this person on the Cloudflare network? If not, it denies that request. For that person to even get on the Cloudflare network, it validates some stuff through here. So first it's going to look, okay, is this person even allowed access to this URL by their group membership? And we tie it to an Azure AD group where we say remote control access. That person has to be explicitly joined to that group before it even lets them ping to that URL. Then it's going to check that the requesting device they're coming from runs our EDR, runs our secondary EDR plus our ransomware protection, is Intune compliant with all of our compliance policies. It's encrypted, has its firewall enabled, and we even have some other checks like services are running our vulnerability scanner and things of that nature. Once it says that's all well and good, it's going to actually finally pass the request to the remote control tool. All of this has not hit the remote control tool until that is all done. Now it's going to let you talk to the remote control tool, which, hey, let's go back to chapter 2, is fed into our Azure Active Directory single sign-on. A user password combination is passed. That person then gets a number match prompt on their phone from Azure AD, and they enter the SSO flow. Now Azure AD is going to validate a second time, is this person in the right group? It's going to validate, is this device compliant? Are they in the United States? Do they have access to this app? And is their user account not at risk? Cool. It approves the SSO request, and our user logs in, goes about their business. This all happens in a sequence of less than a few seconds. That's a lot of layers to break through. Not saying an adversary couldn't do it, but what a tremendous attack surface reduction versus what a lot of MSPs likely do is they have the same remote control tool sitting on the internet, 443 is open, they got usernames, passwords, and maybe they've integrated Duo, maybe. So let's move on. Chapter 4, the need to know and the need to know. There's some hard to swallow pills for some folks. Probably not as many folks here, but I've given a similar talk to fellow MSPs, and I feel like this is a tougher one. You don't need global administrative privileges to do your password reset ticket. We're going to talk about the least privilege necessary concept. Now, everyone here has read 800-171, I'm sure. You're not unfamiliar with this, so this would be treaded territory, I'm sure. But we know users should only have access to the privileges they need to do their jobs. That's the need to know. Those privileges should be assigned just in time. That's more attack surface reduction. That means privileges should expire. We can use technologies that allow us to be eligible for permission to activate it and then let that permission lapse so that we don't have 24/7, 365 exposure. The fewer accounts with persistent privileges, the better. High-level privileges, like global admins, where possible, should involve an authorization step, and that's our need to know. Get a second set of eyes on requests for big privileges. The tools are there. Azure AD Privilege Identity Management is a big one. This is big attack surface reduction when we add a second step. And hey, look, 3.1.4. So it's separation of duties of sorts, and a great way to showcase to an assessment team, like, look, we're really taking this access control stuff seriously. all that stuff that I mentioned can be done with Azure Privileged Identity Management. It's a great suite of tools. There's other stuff out there like CyberArk, but the idea here is we're going to go down to one identity. I'm going to have my one identity, Andy. I'm not going to have my Andy.admin account anymore. And Andy's going to be eligible to elevate into a role as a global administrator if I go through the sequence of steps, if someone else authorizes it, if I pass additional conditional access to make sure I'm using strong MFA. So again, our case study, we have a sysadmin, needs to do some work in Azure AD, make a security configuration change that requires global admin, and that's rare, but still it happens. They access the Azure portal for their tenant. They head to the Privileged Identity Management blade. They locate the role they're eligible for. They go to activate it. Now, this is a good sysadmin, so they only activate it for 4 hours, even though it will let them do it for up to 8. They're provided to provide a ticket number and a justification. They type that in. They have to enter that. That goes into an immutable log. And then some conditional access rules are applied to make sure that this person's logging in from an acceptable location. We validate a geolocation IP, that they're coming from an authorized platform, like they're not doing this from their iOS device, that they come from our approved IP address list, and they're using that strong multi-factor auth. Now, a list of approvers gets an email asking them to approve or deny the request, and only those approvers can do it, and they have to themselves go authenticate to the portal to authenticate it, or to allow it. Now, those approvers authorize the PIM, the sysadmin gets their email with approval, they refresh, and boom, they've got their credentials. They will automatically expire in 4 hours. We don't have to trust them to turn it in or deactivate it. It happens for them. Does this slow them down? For sure. Is it inconvenient? Definitely. But it's only a few minutes. Let's be real. And finally, Chapter 5, some advanced stuff. This is what I lovingly call CFO now. This is how CFOs feel. Anytime we're going to request budget to you, something as drastic as replace the Windows 7 machines, which the MIT always trying to make changes happen. They feel like we'll financially recover. Some advanced topics. Web application firewalls are fantastic. They are expensive. As an example, like Azure Firewall, last I looked into it, the minimum's like $12,000 a year, so pretty hefty. But if you have infrastructure that has to be internet facing, these are fantastic because you can do a ton of really cool stuff, like limit specific URLs to specific mechanisms and IPs and things of that nature. So fantastic. Honeypots and sand traps are one of my favorite pet topics. Canary tokens are among those. Honeypots, that's putting something out there, like on the internet where you let it get attacked and you take the intelligence you get off of that, like a list of IPs that are trying to log into it, and you block them everywhere else. Sand traps are very similar, but that's a bit more where you're actively trying to mess with an attacker and like draw them in, make them explore, make them expend time and energy just for a bunch of fake stuff. Application allow listing is an advanced topic that's has a lot to do with attack surface reduction, less so about access control. But this is incredibly powerful, especially if you use code signing enforcement for things like PowerShell scripts and whatnot. It can be a massive attack surface reduction on your endpoints. Separate management infrastructure is a pretty niche topic, and I don't think there's a lot of applicability for it. But this is using new domains and separate tenants and whatnot to at least obfuscate things and make it hard to OSINT about your environment. SOC monitoring, of course, everyone here probably has some form of SOC monitoring. I know there's a lot of talk about Sentinel in the previous talk. That's getting to the point where I think you basically need that to be at C level 2. Penetration testing is another big one, and there's more and more. And these things go as far as your budget will take you. Now, again, I have to draw us back to the fact that all of this starts with identify. You can't do anything that I just talked about unless you know what it is you're protecting. A shitty job identifying and cataloging and inventorying your IT systems cascades and means everything else is going to suck. So if you want to do any of this stuff and you think anything that I'm talking about is exciting and cool and you want to go look up Cloudflare Zero Trust and whatever, I absolutely encourage it, but only after you know how you would apply it to protect things in your environment. Now I'm going to tie it all together. loosely. I tried pretty hard to align this to Bastille Day. It's kind of hard, so I did kind of off track a little bit. But who are you gonna be? You have some choices ahead of you. You could do nothing. You could do none of the things I talked about, and you could take your chances. But maybe you end up like the guy on the left, or you do all this super cool stuff. You do all this attack surface reduction. You really tighten up your access control, and then you end up looking like the guy on the right. Pretty obvious choice to me. And look at that. I'm right at time. I've got 2 minutes for questions. Let's have it.
Now's your chance to ask Andy what you've been losing sleep over, things that you're just burning questions that you need answered.
Access control or French Revolution. I can
That's
answer
it. Those 2 topics. Don't ask anything up beyond those. That's somebody typing, so maybe.
I see John typing. I got him. No, I would not. My interpretation, we had a lengthy discussion with our DIPCAC team on this. It was the subject of 2 days of debate. It was the subject of multiple escalations to several people up the chain in the DIPCAC team. We ultimately successfully argued that I could use my daily driver account and have a separated role that I would activate through PIM eligibility. And that was sufficient for the controls around having separate privileged functionality, privileged role functionality from unprivileged. It was a tough debate. We ultimately won that one, and the tooling has actually gotten better because one of their problems was like, okay, well, suppose you activate the role, can't you still go check your email? Isn't that a non-privileged function? It's like, yeah, okay, in a way you're right. But now we have a way of using conditional access. What we can say is if someone's got an active global admin role, just block them from accessing Outlook and SharePoint and Teams. Done.